Sport Business. Global Sports Intelligence.
Hello and welcome to the Sport Business Podcast. I'm John Rest, Chief Correspondent for Sport Business, and with me again today is my new co-host for at least another week, Joseph Perry, Editor of Sport Business Media. Hi, Joe.
Hello, yes, back another week. I don't think I'll be here much longer. I think the Tartan Army is making its slow march back home, so we'll be seeing Martin very soon, I suspect.
Quite possibly. Today, we will go in the newsroom looking at IMG's new deal with the Polish Ekstraklasa, what it means, what the Ekstraklasa can hope for in their next domestic rights cycle, and perhaps why they went with the agency. We'll also have a look at the work of MotoGP, now fully under the ownership of Liberty Media, and deal with CAA Sports involving sponsorship and what that may well mean for the series going forward. We'll then be joined by Catherine Davies as we look into a rather controversial NHL deal, or end of an NHL deal in Canada. And then, of course, part 3 of the podcast, we will look at any other business and look at the sporting week and months ahead. Joe, first and foremost, you're in the nice air-conditioned Sport Business studio. Hydration breaks. You must be very important this time of year. How have you been coping with the heat and the World Cup?
I think it must be a lot hotter here than it was for England in Boston. I mean, that looks chilly, and it didn't prevent several hydration breaks, some of which were sponsored and some of which were more spontaneous. But yes, I was actually away over the weekend with some extended family, not all of whom are into football, but it was interesting of the various topics that had obviously cut through and caught the imagination of the wider viewing public. Hydration breaks was probably number one. Lots of people asking what the deal was with them. I don't know whether you've had similar questions from interested family and friends, but it's made the news here as well this morning. Gianni Infantino's come out with some comments about them. He's denied that they're a commercial ploy. Essentially, he said that FIFA, quote, gains absolutely nothing from the breaks, and that there's no additional revenue for FIFA, as all of those commercial deals have been agreed long before. So what he says basically is it's about having a level playing field. Yes, some stadiums are cooler, but actually across the entire continent, there are some very hot ones, and we have indeed seen that so far. He says it's fair then for all teams to be having a break. And he says, and FIFA themselves on their website suggest that the breaks may have contributed to the unprecedented levels of intensity the matches have been played in. Now, I don't know whether the intensity in England-Ghana was unprecedented, but that's their side of the argument. What do you make of it?
Yeah, well, he said there's no additional revenue for FIFA, didn't he? Because the deals, as you say, have been signed off well in advance. Now, we know that. We've been writing about this, but what it does allow FIFA to do is probably build that advertising package into future rights deals. So I don't think we've seen the last of these, as you say. I mean, interestingly, in the UK, obviously, where we're watching it, BBC obviously don't, but ITV haven't been going off to break, just idle chit-chat amongst the commentators, and they've gone back to the studio for some tactical advice on chalkboards, which have gone down as well as you can expect in some quarters of the UK press and social media, unfortunately. But Imran, who we'll hear from a little dispatch later, he's having rosé on a boat in Cannes this week, was obviously watching a game on M6 last night, and they do use the hydration breaks to go to adverts, and I don't think he was entirely impressed with it. So yeah, I think it's something that is going to be here to stay, regardless of how chilly it looked last night in Boston. I think it was almost worth getting the Bovril out after 22 minutes rather than water. Just a couple. We won't do our high or lower from last week, Joe, but we will look at a couple of the interesting TV ratings from kind of round 2, if you like, of the fixtures, because I thought the interesting one was in France, obviously, because we had the first kind of big weather delay of the tournament where France's game the other night against Iraq, I think it was a 2-hour delay, was it, at half-time? I managed to stay up until half-time and then had to turn in. But M6 had a great first-half average audience of 8.9 million. Bearing in mind, it kicked off close to, is it 11 o'clock, was it? Okay, kick-off in France. But the game averaged 4.9 million overall. I think there was a hell of a drop-off, understandably, for fans into the second half. And in Germany against Ivory Coast, great end of the game for Germany, late win. ZDF got 18.26 million, so a very good share, but both of those viewing figures were down in both markets on the previous game because of obviously the later kickoff times. Interesting line in Sweden as well. Obviously got thumped by the Netherlands, but TV4 Play, the game was on TV4 itself and then on the streaming platform, and they claim to have had a record number of sign-ups, so already they're getting their monies back on their rights fee there.
Yep. I mean, France in particular, we've actually written about this, our colleague Fred Dunn. M6 really needs France to go deep, probably to reach a third tournament in a row if they're going to stem the losses on this contract, because as we've mentioned time and time again, the late kickoff times are not advertiser friendly. So for a commercial broadcaster like M6, you're really relying on some on-field brilliance to help you try and stay in the black, or to get as close to the black as you possibly can. But perhaps it will pay dividends in the next World Cup, which seems like a long way away now, but obviously in a much more time zone friendly location for European audiences.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's stay in football. Let's go in the newsroom with IMG Ekstraklasa, a story that we published first thing this morning, Wednesday, that we record. Our colleague Maria Koladova has done deep interviews with both IMG and the Polish League on this. Very interesting that I found that, the Ekstraklasa has gone down the route of kind of turning to agency help for their next cycle, just the kind of nuts and bolts of this deal, if you like. They're going to lead the sales process. They're going to work with the league on kind of the packaging and the tender process, have discussions with potential bidders, negotiations, contract talks. They're going to be there throughout. The tender, we think, is going to, the RFP will launch, we believe, around September. The hope is that the process will be kind of done and dusted by year end. The new deals, I believe, are 27, 28 to 30, 31. So a little bit of time. But Joe, what was your take on this appointment? And perhaps if you can give a little bit of colour on where the Ekstraklasa is at the moment with their TV rights revenue.
I mean, this is a tender process that has been in the pipeline for some time. I think it wasn't even the last Sportel, it was the previous Sportel when this came to be on the agenda, and it ramped up a little bit at the last Sportel. We published a piece towards the end of last year, written by our colleague Martin on SportBusiness Media, about what the Ekstraklasa is hoping to achieve with this domestic tender. So the numbers at the moment, Canal Plus is paying 325 million zloty per season, which is about 75 million euros. So it's a fairly chunky deal, certainly outside the big five leagues in Europe. And at the moment, it's sublicensing one match to TVP per round. And that's kind of what it's been for quite a while now. And I remember reporting on the current deal when that was done, and the links that they'd gone to the league to try and stimulate some competition, perhaps to bring in some streamers from outside who weren't the usual competition for Canal. And it seems like that's something they're trying to do again, and they're looking to IMG to try and help them achieve that. Slightly surprising for some of us who've been following this one, because we know there's been agency interest from other places, not just IMG. And if you look at how some of those agencies are doing their business in the Polish market, perhaps you'd have said from the outside looking in that they stood a strong chance of being appointed. But it's IMG who's got this business. I know there are going to be comparisons, and you'll know something about this, John, with the Eredivisie, which is perhaps a similarly sized league, certainly outside that big upper echelon of European football, where IMG has been able to use its full range of services to support the league.
Yeah, I think they're interesting to compare a couple of the leagues, actually. Poland, Belgium, Netherlands. Now, if you look at the population of Poland, it's 38 million, I think, roughly. So you could get Netherlands and Belgium in there and still have a bit of change as well. So it's a big market. A little question for you. Do you know where they are in the UEFA coefficient, Poland, as a league?
I don't know where they are, but I do have a bit of trivia, which is that for almost all of last season, it was the most competitive league in Europe. And actually, at the start of April, the top six were divided by 6 points.
Yes, they were. Yeah, it was an incredible league. So they're 12th in the UEFA coefficient. So there's some way. The Netherlands, I think, are 7 and Belgium are 8. I've spoken to Marcin Anemuki, the president of the Ekstraklasa, over the years. He's very keen to stress that they think that the Ekstraklasa is a, top 10 league in Europe. Obviously, the top 5 take care of themselves, but they do see themselves as a legitimate challenger to the likes of Eredivisie and the Jupiler Pro League. If you look at their TV rights figure, that is a decent number, as you mentioned there, close to 75 million euros. The new Eredivisie domestic deal is 135, I think, pretty hefty. Belgium is much more in line; it's around 85 million. Yeah, IMG worked with Eredivisie on the kind of global picture, the international tender there, and have done a great job, again, in that kind of strategy advisory role and helping bring deals to the table. So it's very similar in what they're doing domestically with Ekstraklasa, kind of making sure the packaging is right to entice bidders to the table. But yeah, that deal you referenced, the current deal, which you said was 76 million euros, that was up around about 30%, I think, on the previous cycle, which was again Canal Plus, TVP, one game per week. So yeah, as you say, healthy uplift. They will no doubt be wanting more. I just wonder where that next uplift is going to come from. I wonder if the reason for bringing in IMG, someone new, is to freshen up the market a little bit and perhaps, well, they won't want to say it publicly, move away from Canal Plus and TFP, certainly drive a little bit of competition in there. What do you think?
Yeah, so they certainly used the idea of competition, perhaps from a new player, as a stalking horse last time, and it worked quite successfully, as you say. They got an uplift from Canal Plus without, to the best of my knowledge, a bid actually coming in from a new player. And it seems that they're leaning perhaps even more heavily into that idea this time. They have their own post-broadcast subsidiary, which is Live Park, and they're investing another 20 million euros into a new production facility, which should be up and running by the time the new domestic deal kicks in 2027. And the idea there, I think, is to create a plug-and-play model where anyone can come in, whether that's DAZN, whether that's Amazon, whether that's Paramount, just for example, can come in, can take a signal and actually have a ready-made product. And if they want to, they can add some of their own packaging, they can do some chopping and tailing, but fundamentally what they need is already there. And actually, when Maria spoke to the league this week, they did name-check several of those players, name-check DAZN, name-check Netflix and Amazon, and in fact made the point that of the 13 to 14 million households in Poland, 11 million of them already subscribe to Netflix. So there does seem to be an opportunity there. It seems to be quite a mature market in terms of streamers, although the league themselves made the caveat that not every Polish viewer is going to be ready to consume sports via streaming. So I think there is certainly some room for that to be explored. And with IMG on board, with their relationships on a more international level with some of these broadcasters and streamers, I would suspect that's something they're going to be trying to pursue more heavily.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned Paramount there. We know how aggressive they've been in with, certainly Champions League in new markets, but actually Canal Plus, we don't know. Perhaps Paramount were kind of around in that market, but Canal Plus have renewed their Champions League deal for 27 to 31 earlier this year. I think Polsat have got the lower competitions in UEFA club competitions, so there's nothing available there for a newcomer. But obviously the league is, when you're coming into a new market, it is the domestic league that you want. So yeah, it'd be really interesting to see that. And you mentioned the production house. That is seemingly, as Maria has found out talking to both parties, that kind of played a key part as well. IMG's expertise in production recently got a global production remit with DFB for the Pokal. Obviously, high profile, lost the Premier League contract with the Premier League taking that in-house, but that kind of production capability and expertise is something that Ekstraklasa hope to tap into too, right?
Exactly that. And I think from IMG's perspective, they've been keen to stress that this is something which they were able to provide as a full service agency. They can provide consultancy on production. They can then provide media sales and all the different services throughout that. So yes, let's see how this one goes. As I said, I think it's perhaps slightly surprising news to some of us who've been following this one, but plenty of time yet for this to run.
Excellent. Let's actually move on. I want to talk a little bit about MotoGP. Not a sport I have any knowledge of, I have to say, as a fan point of view. But I feel like we're starting now to get a little bit of momentum from the Liberty takeover. We're now, I think, almost a year into that merger having been completed and passing all the regulatory hurdles that it had to do. And I think it's been a touch of a slow burner, I think, in terms of how we see these, the fact that Liberty now have F1 and MotoGP, how are they going to coexist? Is there going to be some kind of crossover? I think we're starting to see a few synergies. Just this week, colleague Ben Cronin did a piece on CAA Sports being brought in as the exclusive sponsorship agency of MotoGP. Now that mirrors a role that they already have with F1. So I think that's super interesting to kind of see what kind of sponsors they're going to look to bring on board. Now, I think we did an interview 2 years ago with Daniel Rossamondo, who's left now, but at the time was CCO of Dorna MotoGP. So he left at the end of last year, but he was kind of quite keen to stress, this was when the deal had first been announced, but, was nowhere near any kind of regulatory approval, that they'd be run as separate businesses. There was not going to be any bundling of media or sponsorship. That has kind of been the case so far, but I think you're going to see CAA tapping into some non-endemic sponsors in the motorcycling world, or non-motorcycling world if they're non-endemic. So I think that's going to be super interesting to keep an eye on. We've also seen in recent weeks some of the same principles in F1 being applied to MotoGP. This month, MotoGP reached an agreement with 5 of its manufacturers on a new commercial contract for 27 to 31. Actually, this week, that's now all 11 teams, I believe, have now signed that. It's kind of similar, I guess, to the Concord agreement in F1. Ensures the manufacturers are receiving a fair share of income from the championship. Much more of a collective approach, if you like. It's the first time they've had this in MotoGP. It's been obviously crucial and central to the growth of F1 and the teams and what they get out of that. So, yeah, I thought something worth kind of keeping an eye on. I think we're going to see some moves. Certainly, we know the US is a big target market. The UK is a big target market for MotoGP. So, I think watch this space on what sponsors CAA are going to bring to the table. But they've certainly kind of gone with a big agency and an agency that's very, very well known in the US, obviously, and got connections. So, yeah, I thought that was worth flagging. Talking of flagging, I'm sure in this heat we are. So we are going to take a break. I will return with someone familiar to our audience, Catherine Davies.
From private equity to global media and US college sports, unlock the most trusted data and insights in our reports. Explore more at sportbusiness.com.
Hello and welcome back to the second part of the Sport Business Podcast, where we go inside the deals. And I'm delighted to be joined by Catherine Davies, back on the pod, America's Bureau Chief. How are you, Catherine?
I'm very well, thanks. It's been a while, hasn't it?
It has. Lovely to see you. Resplendent in your Canada shirt. We'll talk about that in a minute.
It also has a name on the back. It says Davies on the back, which is, so it's my shirt, isn't it? Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
A family relative. Now,
That's right.
This section, we normally go inside the deal where we talk about a major new rights deal. This is actually one where we're going to talk about the end of a rights deal. But first of all, I want to talk to you about the World Cup. You're in Vancouver, as the listeners are aware. We had Martin send a piece last week from the streets of Boston. What's it been like in Vancouver?
Well, it's been extraordinary, actually, because I think I said this before in the podcast earlier, a couple of months ago, that Vancouver really didn't know what was going to hit it. I mean, they had the Olympics here, but that's different. I mean, half of the people were up at Whistler and there were different venues. And it's just a different event and a different scale, obviously. Vancouver's done an extraordinary job. I think you've seen the photos of the Science World Dome that's been made into the biggest FIFA World Cup football. And they painted they unfurled a huge Canadian flag on the top of Grouse Mountains. All the planes could come in, could see it. And World Cup fever really is everywhere. And I think what's really surprised a lot of people is when you get a lot of sports fans gathering in a place, people here immediately think back to the 2011 Stanley Cup riots when Vancouver lost to the Boston Bruins in Game 7. And there were tens of thousands of people in the street burning cars and looting, and hundreds got arrested, and there was millions in damage. And so I think people think, oh no, all these sports people out in the streets again. And for the Australia-Turkey match, there were 10,000 Aussies in yellow budgie smugglers, no less, which is sort of a crime in itself. But they were walking, and they had Vegemite containers painted on them. And they were walking down the main street, and they were dancing with the police. And it was just the most good-natured, fun gathering that I think Vancouver's ever seen. And I did notice that there were a lot of police. There were snipers on the top of buildings, our snipers, not bad snipers, but good snipers, if you can have such a thing, to maintain the peace. And people they're thrilled. The sentiment's really changed. People are impressed. They're so proud that Vancouver is showing so well because the weather's beautiful. It's a beautiful city. And everything about the stadium, the process of getting in, everything has been seamless. So I think people have really, really come around, despite the $104 million price tag per game, which will take us years to pay off. But no, it's been brilliant. And I think it's very exciting. I went to the New Zealand-Egypt match and I marched with all the Kiwis. And I've never been in such a good-natured, fun, ridiculous, good-humored event. It was brilliant fun. And the game itself was excellent. The first half, anyway.
Yeah, and you're going to the Canada game this evening, right? Well, for us, it's this evening.
It's in about 3.5 hours.
Okay.
I'm in line for a lottery ticket. Don't ask me the details of that because I don't think it'd be proper to mention it, but I am going to the march, and they're expecting about 30,000 people in the march.
Excellent. And very quickly, you went to a New Zealand game. What's been the game day experience in terms of the stadium, getting in, the security, have you had to spend $8 on a bottle of water?
No, it was $5.75. I noticed that. And you could bring in, and in the end, you could bring in your own water bottle because they had water fountains there. It was utterly seamless. I know the head of BC Place, and I texted him and I said, "Congratulations, mate. This is superb." And he was quite chuffed about that. There were thousands of people, like tens of thousands, trying to get in at the same time, and it took us 8 minutes to get through. Security, bag check, in you go, and it was brilliant. It was utterly superb. I was so impressed.
Perfect.
So a little bit of hometown pride, but also
Exactly.
really impressed at how they've done it. Good job. I don't know what the other stadia are like, but I think Vancouver's way up there. And it was voted the #1 host by Sports Illustrated, so we got that.
There we go. Well, moving from the warmth of the grass to the ice, seamless transition. You wrote a story in the last few days, headlined "Rogers Calls Time on CBC's 75-year NHL run." Now, for those that aren't kind of aware in Canada, or maybe, those that are more UK based, or even in Germany, these are live games. You can kind of compare it to, I don't know, the BBC just getting rid of Match of the Day, or ARD scrapping the sports show of the Bundesliga matches. This is a huge moment in Canadian sports media. Can you give a little bit of the background on this?
Yeah, sure. Well, it just came out the other day, last week, that in the new deal, which we knew about, where Rogers Sportsnet, a pay TV sports broadcaster and streamer owned by Rogers, the biggest telecom, or one of the two biggest telecoms, they had renewed their exclusive media rights deal to the NHL. They did this last year for the next 12 years, starting in 2026-27, the beginning of this season. And they're paying a massive $11.2 billion. And when I say dollars throughout, I mean Canadian dollars, so monopoly dollars. But it's $11.2 or $11.1 billion, and that's up from $5.2 billion in the previous 12-year deal. But the thing that happened last week is that Sportsnet announced that it was no longer going to give, because it's essentially giving, 2 matches to the CBC, our public service broadcaster, to air in primetime on Saturday nights. And so what that means is that Canadians who've been accustomed, as you mentioned, for 75 years to having 2 matches, first on radio since the 30s, and then on television since 1952, having 2 prime matches involving Canadian teams every Saturday during the season, every regular season round, and then the playoffs and the Stanley Cup finals on free-to-air television every Saturday night. I mean, it was the so-called last bastion of appointment TV. People sat down with their families and they watched Hockey Night in Canada, which is a brand that belongs to the CBC, which from the start of this coming season will no longer be. All the matches will be only on Sportsnet channels, apart from any sublicensing deals they may do. And we can talk about that later with Amazon or DAZN or whoever they may choose to deal with. Yeah. So it's sort of the end of an era, and there's been a huge response in the media about it. People are devastated and they're furious, and it's like, what's our public broadcaster before? What's it for? It's its remit, it's its mandate. So there's a lot of discussion, a lot of anger, really.
Understandable, yeah. As you say, huge story, and we'll put the link to the story in the podcast notes for the listeners. Firstly, is this a purely, you say CBC is a public broadcaster, is this a cost issue? And secondly, what are they going to do? How are they going to fill this void in the scheduling?
Yeah, well, good question. It's not a cost issue for the CBC, despite the fact that they're getting a $1.3 billion subsidy this year, which has been cut by $200 million. So they've got less money to play with. But they were essentially getting these 2 matches for free since 2014, since the beginning of the last 12-year deal. Rogers sublicensed them these 2 matches. But what happened is that Rogers spent a couple $100 million revamping the studio and the control rooms in the CBC building. So the CBC got this for free. And then what Rogers did was they took all the advertising. So CBC got no advertising. And that's a key point, because before, in the prior contract from 2008 to 2014, the CBC was paying about $100 million a year, $600 million in total, compared to $5.2 billion. And the annual spend of $100 million, they recouped that in spades from selling advertising around it, because we have advertising on our public broadcaster. And so half of the CBC's annual revenue for the whole broadcaster was earned through advertising around NHL games. So the CBC got no money, but they didn't spend any money. It was actually, I spoke to an executive producer of Hockey Night in Canada who'd been working on the show since the 70s, and he said that it was actually a good deal for the CBC. They got these brand new studios, which Sportsnet had vacated because they've gone back to their own facilities in the Mount Pleasant area of Toronto. They didn't get any advertising revenue, but they didn't spend any money. It was a Sportsnet production from day one of Sportsnet's deal in 2014. And they've simply moved the Sportsnet production back to Sportsnet Studios in Mount Pleasant, and the CBC has nice new shiny studios and no Hockey Night in Canada. They maintain the brand, though. That's the key thing. It's a CBC brand. And I think what we understand is that Rogers wanted in 2014 to brand it as, Rogers Night in Canada or something like that. But Gary Bettman, the commissioner of the NHL at the time, said, no, I don't want to be the guy who's going to kill a Hockey Night in Canada. He didn't want to be that guy. But I guess enough time has passed and it's okay now. So Rogers will put its own branding on it, which it wanted to do from the beginning. So will it be Sportsnet Hockey, or who knows what it'll be. But CBC retains the Hockey Night in Canada brand. So I guess the question is, what will they put in that spot?
Yeah, so what is going in? If I'm in Canada and I want to watch ice hockey and I've only got CBC, what am I going to be watching instead?
Well, I do understand that a lot of people are probably going to find the NHL wherever it may be. They'll go to the local sports bar. They'll subscribe grudgingly to Sportsnet. It starts at $30 a month. They'll pirate it, whatever they do. But on the CBC, they had said they plan to, first of all, do a weekly primetime sports show focusing on Canadians in World Championships. So really, that's great. We'll see the Canadians competing in the World Biathlon Championships and the World, Rowing Championships. And that's something that a lot of people will be interested in. I don't think it'll match the numbers who watched hockey. And also there was some criticism of that. It's like, who wants to watch Canadians in pre-Olympic championships when they were watching hockey? People are going to be a little upset about what's the change in their Saturday night programming, I guess. There's also thoughts that they could put in other hockey, which would be a very valid idea. We have the Professional Women's Hockey League. CBC already shows 17 games a year. They could show more of that. And the big question is, could they step up and show CHL hockey? Now, that's Canada's junior hockey league, which is essentially kind of like a second division. There's 52 Canadian teams across the country in the CHL. There's 9 American teams. About 40% of the players in the NHL right now came through the CHL. It's good hockey. Right now, it's mostly streamed on its own streaming channel. TSN, the rival sports broadcaster of Bell Media, shows regular season games. So it would be strategically important for the CHL to have coverage on the CBC, because then there might be an inventory swap. They might get some rights fees from the CBC. But also the CHL, which, as I mentioned, is very, very good hockey, is struggling a bit from the new NIL legislation that came in governing NCAA hockey in the States. So a lot of top CHL players realize they can get more money going to play for college in the States than stay in the CHL. So the CHL's had a bit of a brawn drain. They're losing players to U.S. colleges. So keeping them in Canada, they might be able to get more sponsorship, pay the players and keep them in Canada. And that would be a great Saturday night show. Love to see it.
That's the kind of CBC scheduling dealt with. Rogers, what are they going to do going forward? We've discussed before this big new deal they've got. As yet, there is no sub-licensing deal. They've got a hefty rights fee to try and pour back some money on.
Well, they certainly do. And I think what they're going to be doing is putting a lot more on Sportsnet Plus, their streaming service. I mean, the vast majority of advertising in Canada goes towards digital outlets. So they would probably prefer to gain more advertising from digital companies rather than, what they were getting from the free-to-air. And they'll show it across the Sportsnet channels. They're going to probably try to renew the deal they have with Amazon Prime Video. Amazon Prime Video had a package of Monday night matches. Nobody knows how much they paid, but I heard from the executive producer I spoke to that it's a lot less than people think. Not sure what people think, but it's a lot less. So the likelihood is that they're going to try and renew with Amazon Prime Video and give them a better package of matches, probably on Wednesday nights. Because previously it was on Monday nights. I believe they got 1, maybe 2 matches featuring a Canadian team. But the problem was it wasn't always exclusive. And that's what Prime were paying for. It would be on one of the French channels or one of the regional channels. So they weren't getting exclusivity. And apparently the ratings were very poor. The word I heard was abysmal or dismal or something like that. The ratings were poor. So they will be looking to give Amazon an upgraded package and earn an upgraded fee. And there's thinking that they will look at another streaming service as well. I mean, we know that DAZN has just done a deal to show the CFL, the Canadian Gridiron League. They may be interested in upping their Canadian content, which is a whole new topic to talk about. They talked about Crave, which is the Bell Media streaming service. So I expect we'll see at least Wednesday night hockey on Amazon Prime and perhaps another streaming package as well. Another key factor is that there had been talk that Rogers would be showing some matches on free-to-air on its network of CityTV channels, which are in 6 cities. But I've since heard that there's going to be no free-to-air coverage at all. which is surprising. I thought they might want to use their city TV networks. They don't cover all of the country. There's not one city TV network east of Montreal, and that's a fair chunk of the country out there. So it's just going to be on pay and streaming, and we don't know exactly how it's going to be shown yet.
So that leads me to kind of final question, I guess, is what does it mean for hockey in Canada? Is there, when was the last Canadian team to win a Stanley Cup? We're going back
1993.
Wow, a few decades.
They've come close, but
they have.
It's difficult in Canada because the teams, they have to pay their players in American dollars. The exchange rate is pretty rubbish right now, and it has been for some time. Although it did reach par during COVID. I remember that. That was a good day. But it's very expensive for them, and also they can't compete with teams in Nevada or Florida who have very favorable tax regimes. So it's difficult for them to match their American counterparts. So it's been, what's that? Is that 30 years? Yeah. It's
over
been
33. Yeah.
Over 30 years since Canadian teams won. We're ever hopeful. One comment I read, and it really made me think, is that Canadians, they've been priced out of hockey for a long time. It's, hundreds of dollars to take your family to the game with, parking and tickets and getting the food and the merch and everything. It was very expensive to have a subscription. The free-to-air matches on Saturday nights were sort of the last entry point, and that's gone. So I think hockey may suffer. And I think that partly because the Football World Cup has been, so far, a smashing success here. And so we may see a bit of a shift. I mean, soccer is the number one sport by participation among young people in Canada. It's one of the top three. Hockey's first, of course, but then basketball and football, soccer are sort of second in terms of most watched sports. And we have had 4 or 5 million immigrants come in the last decade, and they're coming from countries where soccer is the number one or the number two sport. I think hockey's going to have a tough ride from now on. I think people will probably not be subscribing in their millions to Sportsnet. It's expensive. There's a cost of living crisis. Soccer's there. We've got these young heroes on the pitch. Hopefully today they'll show their mettle against Switzerland. And yeah, it's a tough time. It's going to be interesting to see what happens.
Excellent. Well, Catherine, we'll let you shoot off because you've probably got to go and join the march into the city centre.
I'm going to paint the little maple leafs in my face and go down there. I'm not going to drink, mind you. It's only it's 8:30 in the morning. But I imagine most of the voyageurs, the Canadian fan club, will have been in their cups for a while.
Excellent. Well, stay safe and we will see you on the pod soon.
Good. Okay. You take care, John. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
As mentioned, we will put a link to that media article in the podcast notes. Myself and Joe will be right back after the break with a look ahead and any other business.
Stay ahead in the business of sport with Sport Business newsletters, covering the biggest stories driving the industry. Delivered straight to your inbox at no cost. Sign up today at sportbusiness.com.
Welcome back to the third and final part of this week's Sport Business Podcast. We're going to quickly hear now from Imran Yusuf, Executive Editor of Sport Business. He's at the inaugural Lion Sport event in Cannes, which is taking place during the annual Cannes Lion Advertising and Marketing Festival. If you listen closely, you might hear a chinking of a rosé glass.
Bonjour, John, Joe, and all our listeners. I'm here in Cannes for the big annual gathering of the world of advertising and marketing. Now, I came out of the train station yesterday and saw this huge mural of Jean-Paul Belmondo, the iconic actor who's part of the French New Wave in the 60s. And of course, many people still think of Cannes synonymously with the film festival. But make no mistake, it's this one called Cannes Lions, which is where the money is flowing these days. Big business is here, which means big media and big tech is out in full force. Everyone has a massive activation, a beach takeover, a hotel rooftop, Netflix, Spotify, Disney, OpenAI, you name it. And what we're here for primarily is Lion Sport. There has been a sport beach area for the last couple of years here. That's done by the Stagwell agency. This is the first Lion Sport, though, a 2-day program at the palatial Carlton Hotel. This is the second morning. Yesterday, I had some interesting conversations. Susie Deering, she's CEO of Publicis Sports, charted the journey of Cannes Lion rather well, I thought. She said back in the day, creatives ran the place, and you still see them around. You can tell they'd probably be more comfortable in a garret on the left bank in Paris, maybe 60 years ago. But then at Cannes Lion, you also had the rule of data then after that, and people would talk of nothing else. And what followed that was a couple of years of AI, and now she says it's sport. Every conversation will touch on or center on sport. You know, people in this world love to talk about storytelling and community. Cannes bingo, you want those two on your card. And I think the last year or two has really thrown sport, front and center into this world. Being here, it's heaving, by the way. Yesterday, going up and down the Croisette, that's the main promenade along the bay, it felt a bit like the Northern Line on Wednesday morning, just in slightly more pleasant surroundings. And there's no question, there's hundreds and hundreds of millions of marketing dollars. And those deploying them are looking at sport, perhaps more than ever before, but also in a slightly different ways than before. The creator economy is something we've seen enter the sports media space. That's increasing. And it was informative to catch up with a couple of pioneers in that space. Barrick Prince co-founded Creator Sports Network, and that connects brands with sports-focused digital creators, influencers. They already have deals with the Bundesliga and others. He was keen to stress, though, that his product doesn't cannibalize traditional media distribution, that it's additive instead. But I asked Barrick if he saw himself in maybe 10, 20 years having rights to a top-tier property in a major media market. Here's what he said.
Yeah, I think absolutely. That's definitely on the roadmap. And I think that, sport dependent, but when we look at a lot of sports, there's a lot of inventory out there. And what we've already seen from every major sporting league in the world is they're already bifurcating their rights, right? And when you look at the Premier League, they have multiple broadcasters in the UK. When you look at the NFL and the NBA in the United States, they already have multiple broadcasters. And so with the amount of inventory that they have, now we're not going to be after all the games, but what's to say that we can't have 10 or 15 Premier League games exclusively in a season, or even one game a week? Right now, our deals with the Bundesliga and with the Brazilian Series A, that's what it is we're taking one game a week, one of 10. Right. And so in terms of like the amount of inventory that we're taking exclusivity on, I think in the future, that's going to be able to get a little bit larger, but I don't envision a place where we're going to have the entire season. But I do believe that we're going to be able to pick some opportunities throughout the season to essentially create our own season. I think really the future is like, can I get 10 games from the Bundesliga? Can I get 10 games from the Premier League? Can I get 10 games from Italy? Can I get 10 games from Spain? And suddenly we have a 50-game package that's a little bit of spattering of all of the world's great football instead of like really being focused on one single league.
It was also fascinating to speak to Courtney Hirsch. Now, she's CEO of John Boy Media. And that's a really fast-growing sports content company. It's built mainly around baseball-focused creators. It's led by a guy called Jimmy O'Brien, a.k.a. John Boy, and he's Courtney's brother. Now, they've got a loyal, passionate community, but they're also on the up commercially. MLB has got a stake in them. They've done deal with Fanatics and others. And obviously, they're here in Cannes to meet brands. So I pushed Courtney on if that might dilute their independence, their authenticity. She really stressed, no, they have this mission, and if they stray from it, their followers will know and will let them know. And she herself said, they don't want to do that. She said no to a lot of brands. But I asked her how John Boy Media might differentiate itself here at Cannes.
So brands are excited to work with us because they know that we have the trust of the fans. And we also have the consistency, especially in baseball, which has 162 games per team. It's a daily conversation. So our trust with our consistency creates a lot of trust opportunities for brands to be involved in and integrate in. And that's why brands are really excited to work with us.
Now you can hear the hubbub in the background. That conversation was actually at Lucia Beach. But I was at the Carlton for Lion Sport as well. Some insightful discussions there, including Maria Sharapova, saying that when she won Wimbledon in 2004, age 17, the only data she really had was the speed of her serve, which shows just how much data has penetrated, not just into our world, the business of sport in terms of analytics, fan engagement, and so on, but also, of course, for the athletes. George Russell, F1 driver, was also there. He spoke very eruditely, actually, about how he decompressed. But listen, it wasn't all, celebs. Though Priyanka Chopra Jonas did pass by me as I was waiting for a meeting in another hotel lobby. I have to say, it makes a difference from the usual SportsBiz conference where one might feel a frisson when the head of acquisition for a mid-tier broadcaster might cross your path. I also met Steve Denton, CEO of Open Doors. Now, they are essentially an agency at scale, connecting brands and athletes, mainly in college sports. He told me they did $200 million in deal flow last year. With the advent of NIL, brands are obviously seeing the value of that space. And I asked Steve about that.
So look, we're excited to be here at Cannes. And the reason we're here is to tell the story about why college athletes are so valuable to global brands to tell their story to 18 to 24-year-olds. That's the message. Because if you want to connect with an 18 to 24-year-old in an authentic, organic, and culturally relevant way, there's no better way to do it than with a college athlete. Because college athletes have fans and influencers have followers. There is a difference, and the conversion metrics show that. And that's the story we're telling here at Cannes, and people are excited about it.
Back at the Carlton, Brandon Snow, he's CCO at Redbird Capital Partners. He talked about how they tend to steer clear of making investments without having operating expertise. They're not going to be a passive investor in sports IP by and large. He sees a lot of growth for women's sport, but did say the revenue lines aren't quite there yet when you look at some of the team valuations. They're very much looking at NBA Europe these days, and those guys are also in town, by the way, clearly very busy because they cancelled their chat with me. So perhaps we can expect developments there soon. Right, I've got to get to day 2 now of Lion Sport. The final word I'll give to Simon Morris. He's VP of International Marketing at Adobe. I asked Simon about AI and how it's changing the business we're in.
When I think about AI and sport, like for me, it ultimately comes down to what business outcome do you want to drive? You know, whether you're a club or you're a league, ultimately you might be thinking about, okay, do I want to be able to provide more relevant information to the fans based on their interests? AI can help shortcut you getting there. So more increasingly, clubs want to deliver personalized experience to their fans. They might have a favorite player. They maybe never get into the stadium, but they may be in a different part of the world and they're only going to consume content at certain times. So they really want to deeply understand their fan data so they can serve those fan engagements, experiences at scale. And I think that's what AI can help really those clubs do, right? It can crunch information. It can help you produce content at scale, because if you want to deliver personalized fan experiences, you need a lot of content. This is where AI can start to really step in. What it can't do is replace those human emotions, that storytelling. We always talk about, tools don't tell stories, storytellers do. And that's the beauty of sport, right? There are so many amazing stories. AI can help bring those stories to life and make them available to more people around the world.
Thank you for that, Imran. Travel home safely, and we will have you on the pod soon, no doubt. Joe, look ahead to the either serious. Let's keep this serious and look ahead to some key dates in the media rights calendar.
Yes, another tight UEFA club competition media rights sales turnaround, this time in South Korea, where they went to market last Friday and gave a 10-day deadline, which means first round bids are due on Monday. Rights fair have been held for the last 5 cycles by Eklat, so if you're a betting person, perhaps that's what you'd be expecting to happen this time around. But we're also expecting some news relatively soon on the Spanish language rights in the US, which you'll remember was another tight process. That deadline was at the beginning of this month, so I think we're expecting some progress on that relatively soon.
Yeah, these tight turnarounds, these people are working hard to get these bids in, aren't they? It's interesting to see how they pan out. The Spanish language one is, going to be super interesting. Obviously, the English language rights are tied up for another cycle, but there'll be plenty of competition for that, and interesting and relevant in their kind of home market, if you like, how they fare there. My look ahead is actually slightly serious and slightly not. Looking at the next NBA season, we've only just finished the current one, obviously, as everyone knows, and the streets of New York are still being cleaned up. But the Greek freak, Joseph, we saw him in Budapest on the sidelines of the Champions League. I'm going to butcher his name, Giannis Antetokounmpo. Apologies, I'm going to call him Giannis from now. Has moved or is moving to the Heat. It amazes me in the NBA, these kind of draft deals that are done and the transfers that are done. It's incredible. These multi-million-dollar deals in this sport and transfers that you just don't really see in other sports as such. It's incredible. This one, he's going to the Miami Heat. Now, the interesting thing about this, obviously, he earns a lot of money. This guy he's not moving for the Bucks. I think he's going to earn close to $60 million in his NBA contract, which is almost kind of limited because of the NBA collective bargaining agreement. He's not going to get a huge pay rise. It does mean by moving to Florida, where there is no income tax, he's going to be substantially better off. So well done to him and his agent for that deal. But just interesting to see how the Miami Heat, who were a huge kind of team, a decade, maybe longer ago, with the famous trio they had, what he's going to do for that market. They've not been great for some time. So, yeah, congratulations to the Greek freak, as we fondly call him. I've been told that you're allowed to call him that. It's actually endearing. So, yeah, there we go. I wanted to look at any other business now. What have you got for us? What's floating your boat?
Have you noticed something slightly unusual about the footwear at the World Cup?
Well, I have actually, because my boys watch it and they're trying to find out if any of the players have got their own boots, but neither of my boys have bright pink football boots. And that seems to be the fashion choice across North America at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, two poor souls from Reuters, the news agency, have clearly been forced to sit down and record the footwear worn by every single starting player across all 48 teams. And then found that 69% of starting players are wearing pink boots. And actually, traditionalists will be very, very disappointed to hear that black boots were only spotted on 7 starting players. It is very interesting, this whole thing, maybe perhaps slightly nerdy, that there is probably some commercial context to this as well. Because it's not just Nike and Adidas, it's also Puma, and even Harry Kane is in pink Skechers. Said by one manufacturer to be the colour that stood out the most during the testing phase, both against the grass, obviously pink showing up against grass, but also against the kits. There's only one pink outfield kit, and even then it's kind of slightly pale pink. So clearly in the testing phase, it was a big success. But then, of course, when every single player, or 7 in 10 players, are wearing pink, it probably doesn't stand out too much. So I thought that was interesting. And what's perhaps even more interesting about this is that 2 years ago, trend forecasters WGSN predicted that electric fuchsia would be the colour of spring-summer 2026. So I don't know what came first in this, whether it was a prediction or whether as soon as they read that, these plans were quickly hatched. Either way, they called it spot on. So I thought, John, you are a man who likes his fashion and likes to be ahead of the curve. So here's what you need to be wearing over the next couple of years. 2027, all about luminous blue, which will go nicely with your Arsenal kit.
Yeah,
And
nice.
2028, radiant earth. Do you own any radiant earth?
I have no idea what that is. I don't think I own anything of that nature. I'll have to put it on the birthday list.
You will. You'll be pleased to know that referees are still in their Adidas issued black boots. But I know your eagle eyes have spotted something slightly unusual in a rather private place.
Well, yeah, a couple of things. One is some branding under the armpits of the 4th official when he does the substitute board comes up. There's some antiperspirant advertising there, which is quite clever. But what really has annoyed me, I mean, referees are there to obviously keep the game flowing, run the game. Then it's not about them. It should never be about them. And any game where you remember the referee's name is always a bad game, I think. But they've now got I couldn't believe it when I saw it. It's quite small, but they've got their names on the back of their shirts. The referees and I'm going to call them linesmen to annoy them. Yeah, on the sides, you can actually, now when you're famously singing about who the referee is maybe at the City Ground, Joe, if you're shouting and swearing at a bad, who's the so-and-so in the black, you now know who it is because his name's on the back. So we can't have that. Maybe people are buying referee shirts around the world with their famous referee on the back. Who knows? Pierluigi Collina has missed out on a payday there somewhere along the line. But yeah, terrible. And yeah, you can't have referees in anything other than black boots. So I'm sure we will get one in pink boots one day. Or was it electric blue next year maybe for a tournament? We will leave it there, Joe. Thank you very much, as always, for stepping in, more than stepping in, for holding the fort while Martin has been away. He will no doubt be back, hopefully, next week, safe and sound, I think, potentially with the Scotland team on the same flight. We will find out. And as always, for the most accurate rights fees across sponsorship and media and the latest breaking news from the global sports business industry, please head to sportbusiness.com, and we will be back with another episode next week. Thanks for listening.